Hello and welcome. I'm Kris Perry, Executive Director of Children and Screens. Thank you for joining our Ask the Experts webinar, Online Marketing and Children's Eating Habits, What to Know and What to Do. Children face a constant stream of sophisticated digital marketing techniques that look nothing like the TV ads of the past. Promotion of ultra-processed and fast foods, often embedded in influencer content and amplified by algorithmic targeting, can shape cravings, routines, and health. Today's panel will address these issues and more. They will share practical steps parents can take to build their own and their children's awareness to reduce advertising-driven food choices. Now, let's get started. I'd like to introduce you to today's moderator, Kelly Brownell. Dr. Brownell is the Robert L. Flowers Professor Emeritus of Public Policy, Professor Emeritus of Psychology and Neuroscience, and Director Emeritus of the World Food Policy Center at Duke University. A member of the National Academy of Medicine, Dr. Brownell has published 15 books and more than 350 scientific articles and chapters. He has advised U.S. and international leaders on issues of nutrition, obesity, and public policy, and was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in 2006. His honors include the American Psychological Association's Lifetime Achievement Award and distinguished awards from Yale, Purdue, Rutgers, and the New York Academy of Sciences. Finally, he serves on our own National Scientific Advisory Board. Welcome, Kelly.
Thanks very much, Kris, and congratulations to you and your colleagues for the amazing work that the Children and Screens organization does. It's a pleasure for me to be involved with the organization, and I just constantly admire the work it does. And the work is important on many, many fronts, one of which is the marketing of food to children. So this webinar is especially timely and important. I'd like to make just a few introductory comments, and then I'll introduce our three guests, Dr. Jennifer Harris, Dr. Marie Bragg, and Dr. Diane Gilbert-Diamond, who really constitute an all-star team of people working on this topic. I'm really happy they could all take part, and I just know we're going to have a great webinar. But one of the questions that I often ask is, why do the companies do so much marketing? There are a number of interesting questions that I think will come up in the discussion today, and that's one of them. The companies do tons and tons of marketing. We'll have some statistics on that, but a lot of it's directed at children. And what is directed at children is marketing primarily for unhealthy foods that you'd like to see the population eating less of. So the question is, why are children such an important target for the companies? And why do they spend so much money marketing to children? First of all, just to put it in context, a number of years back, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation started an initiative to help the nation address childhood obesity. And at the time, they were spending $500 million a year on the problem, and they were by far the biggest funder of work in this field in the world. So I set out one day to try to figure out the day of the year by which the food industry had already spent $500 million just advertising, just junk food, just to children. And when I would give talks, I would ask the audience what they thought. And people would say, well, maybe the industry would spend that much by October 1st or July 15th or May the 4th. Well, it turned out that they were spending that much by January 5th each year. So the biggest funder in the world was being outspent by the food industry from January 6th through the rest of the year. So you can see it's just not a fair fight. And one also has to ask, if the industry is spending that much money to recruit children, why are they working so hard to do it? Why are they spending so much money? One also has to ask how powerful it is. Well, you sort of say, well, duh. Of course, it's powerful and having an impact, or the companies wouldn't spend that much money on it. Well, of course, that's true. But it's interesting to see some real life examples of that. And one that I've noticed is if you ask people out there, are you a Coke or a Pepsi person? Almost everybody will have an immediate response. They prefer one over the other. Even among people who aren't drinking a lot of those sort of things, everybody will have a favorite. And if you ask people, can you tell the difference between the two? Almost everybody says yes. Otherwise, why in the world would they have a preference? Well, it turns out not many people can tell the difference when you do studies on that. So if these are pretty indistinguishable products, How in the world can people have such strong brand loyalty? Well, it's all about the marketing. It's what might have been in your school, what might have been the logo on the scoreboard as you were going to football games in high school, what music star or athlete endorsed the product, whatever. So it's very powerful and can have lasting impacts. Um, Another interesting question is what's the right language to use to describe the relationship between companies and the children they advertise to? Now, you could characterize children here as future customers, as potential buyers. You could use sort of the commercial language to describe this relationship. But some people have used a whole different language to describe this, and they've talked about children being the prey of the food industry and children being groomed into a lifestyle that is profoundly unhealthy. So, all the people listening here, you can decide in your own mind what makes most sense in terms of describing this relationship once you hear from our experts. The industry fights really hard to protect their ability to market to children. Anytime there's the least hint of government being involved here, industry comes down like a ton of bricks. And there are some interesting case examples of that that go way back into the 60s and 70s. But they fight really hard to protect it. So it's important to them. Um, Industry will often respond when government starts getting concerned about doing something by saying, we will regulate ourselves. That you don't need to regulate us. We'll set up some sort of an organization or a body to monitor what we're doing. And you can count on us to do that right. And that's occurred in this area as well. And it'll be interesting for our experts to weigh in on how effective that's been. One wonders why this marketing, because it has such obvious negative consequences and parents are very concerned about it, why it's been able to go on forever. Well, there are legal reasons for that, namely the First Amendment of the Constitution protects such speech as commercial speech, and it's hard to do anything about that given American laws, less so in other countries, but certainly true in America. But there's also this sort of interesting blind spot that people have. I was on the faculty at Yale University for many years and taught a big food policy class there each year. And I would ask students in the beginning of the year in a survey, did they think marketing had an influence on people's purchasing behavior? And I would ask them to rate it from 0 to say 10. And people would give it a very high score. The students would say, oh, yeah, it's 9 out of 10. It has a big influence. But then later in the survey, I'd ask how much they were influenced by food marketing, and they would say like 3 or 2. They would give responses to that. So there's this real blind spot people have, where they think, well, everybody else is affected by this, but I'm not. I'm strong. Other people are not as strong as I am. And so why should we do anything to regulate it? Because it's just people being weak. Well, that turns out not to be the case, but this blind spot's a pretty interesting phenomenon. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that the question is who's going to do something about this? If the if the industry is acting in ways that are having harmful impacts, who's the police force here? I mean, who's going to stand up to it and say this is wrong and we're going to do something about it? Well, there you look to government and you start looking to each of the branches of government. Well, the first branch is the legislative branch. So this is the Senate, the House of Representatives, and there are state versions of these things, of course. And it would be the people we elect to office. Uh, they've been notoriously ineffective at doing anything about this, obviously because of the power of the food industry. The next branch of government would be the administrative branch of government. And there you get regulatory agencies under the control of the president, like the Food and Drug Administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Federal Trade Commission, et cetera. And the question is, has that been effective? Well, the answer is no. I mean, the marketing is way worse than it used to be. There's way more of it than there used to be. So the problem seems to be getting worse rather than better. So those two branches of government really haven't done very much. And this is a history that repeats itself a lot. That leaves the third branch of government, which is the judiciary, and that brings up the possibility of litigation. And there's a really interesting question that we can ask ourselves, is litigation likely to be helpful here? And if so, who would sue who for what? And we maybe have the opportunity to address that today. But if we go back and we look at precedents like tobacco, automobile safety, opioids, what we found is that when there's a commercial interest that conflicts with public health, the commercial interest always wins out. And there are decades that go by between proof of harm and government taking any reasonable action. And during that period of time, hundreds of thousands or millions of people die unnecessarily. So, can we count on these precedents to teach us lessons? And the answer is almost certainly yes. And that would lead us to say that the administrative and legislative branches of governments just aren't going to get much done because the industry is way too powerful, has way too much lobbying money, and that the judicial part of government might be, in fact, an important player. So maybe that's something we can discuss with our experts. So again, we have the all-star team on the field today. I'm really happy to be able to introduce each of our experts. I'll introduce them as they're about to speak, and I'll begin with Dr. Jennifer Harris. So Dr. Jennifer Harris is Senior Research Advisor at the University of Connecticut Rudd Center for Food Policy and Health, and a leading international expert on the extent and health impact of food-related marketing. Her current research examines emerging issues in food marketing to youth and their parents, included targeted marketing to Black and Hispanic youth, and digital food marketing to children and adolescents. Dr. Harris received her MBA in marketing from the Wharton School. She was a business executive and consultant in consumer marketing for 18 years before completing her PhD in social psychology at Yale University and established the Rudd Center Research Group. And I can attest to the quality of her PhD work because I was on her dissertation committee some years ago. So Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you, and thanks so much for joining us on this webinar.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you to Children in Screens for this opportunity to speak to this group about food marketing to children and digital media. So last year, I had the pleasure to chair an expert panel on digital food marketing to children. And when I refer to children, I include adolescents. The panel was sponsored by Health Eating Research. So I'd like to start by thanking the panel members and HER for their contributions to the information that I'm presenting today. The most important point that I'd like you to take away from my presentation is this. As parents and caregivers, no matter how much we try to teach our children healthy eating habits, we're always outweighed by the elephant in the room, which is food marketing to kids. So why do I say that? Well, first of all, U.S. food companies spend a lot of money to advertise their products, as Kelly mentioned, over $13.5 billion per year. And to put this number in context, the CDC's entire budget for prevention of all chronic diseases and health promotion the same year was just over $1 billion. That's less than 10% of what companies spent on advertising alone. And on top of that, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars in market research to figure out how to capture the hearts, minds, and, to use their lingo, stomachs of our kids. This is proprietary research that no one else has access to. And these billions almost exclusively promote ultra-processed foods and drinks that are high in sugar, fat, and salt. These four categories make up more than 3/4 of all food advertising expenditures. And despite companies' continued promises to market healthier foods, in 2021, only one fruit or vegetable brand advertised anything at all, and it spent a measly $5,000. This compares to 20 million and up to 500 million that is spent by these other brands. And today, children and adolescents especially are also exposed to massive amounts of digital food marketing anytime and everywhere on their smartphones. These are just a few examples of social media posts that a group of teens we're working with received in one day. And as you can see, this marketing looks nothing like the marketing that we grew up with. So in addition to buying traditional advertising online, food companies create their own content, including social media accounts and mobile apps that children actively engage with on their phones. Branded food messages are also often embedded within entertainment content like gaming sites and videos, disguising its marketing intent. And kids' smartphones now directly link them to their physical environment. So a fast food restaurant can send someone a coupon when they're actually walking by their store. Food companies also reach children in their schools through school-owned devices and on school communications platforms. And brands have become part of online social networks where kids distribute companies' marketing messages virally to their friends, and where trusted influencers, gamers, and celebrities frequently endorse unhealthy food brands. So in our research, we found that kids know there's no avoiding this marketing, but most adults have no idea what their kids are seeing online. And all that food marketing works. Companies know that continued exposure to enjoyable marketing automatically creates positive associations with the marketed brand in a form of classical conditioning. And this is an unconscious process, so she explains why most people think they're not affected. But these positive associations in turn lead people to infer explicit positive attributes about the brand. And in the case of kids, this exposure creates lifelong loyal customers for their brands. And digital food marketing is even worse. Not only does it make kids desire and consume unhealthy foods, it also takes advantage of their developmental vulnerabilities and threatens their rights to privacy and freedom from manipulation. It does this by precisely targeting marketing using kids' personal information and online behaviors to present them with the most effective ads for each individual. It disguises marketing content as entertainment, embedded within game and video content, which deactivates any potential skeptical responses by making it more difficult to recognize as marketing. And it becomes an important part of their social lives, enlisting kids to share marketing content virally through their peer networks. So, which leads to the question, how do we protect children from this harmful influence? Well, nearly all existing and proposed solutions assume that we can teach children to resist unhealthy food marketing. For example, the FTC requires influencers to disclose when they have received compensation from a brand to promote a product. Similarly, the Children's Advertising Review Unit calls for ad disclosures on branded content aimed at children under 13, an example of industry self-regulation. And we also often hear calls for media literacy education or marketing of healthy foods instead of all that unhealthy food marketing. But unfortunately, research has shown that information-based approaches such as these do not protect or inoculate children from harmful marketing influence. For example, ad disclosures may increase children's ability to recognize that a message is marketing, but they don't actually reduce children's desire for the marketed foods. Sometimes they even make that marketing more effective. Similarly, media literacy education can teach children to recognize marketing when they see it, and it increases their skepticism about marketing in general, but it doesn't make that food marketing less effective. And experimental research on the effects of healthy food marketing shows that it does not reduce kids' desire for unhealthy foods. Often, it doesn't even increase their preferences or consumption of the healthy foods that are marketed. So what can we do? Well, caregivers can do a few things to try to limit their children's exposure, such as setting rules about smartphone use at home or utilizing digital privacy protections that are available on some phones and apps. But if your child uses a smartphone, it would be impossible to monitor what they're seeing 24/7. And chances are that they are exposed to lots of food marketing. In a study we did recently, even children as young as 2 to 5 years old saw food brand messages while they were watching child-oriented YouTube videos. So I would argue that the most important thing caregivers can do is to support government policies to limit children's exposure to digital food marketing. And there are a number of current policy initiatives that address broader digital media issues, not just marketing, but these would also help limit harmful digital food marketing practices. At the state and federal levels, data privacy and internet safety policy proposals are on the table, and they have broad bipartisan support. States and school districts can also implement policies to limit children's exposure to digital marketing in schools and on school-owned devices, such as by incorporating digital food marketing restrictions into school wellness policies, or requiring schools to implement ad blocking and student data privacy protections. Caregivers can also get involved in advocacy groups like the Phone Free Schools movement or Fair Play for Kids that are actively working on these issues. But in the long term, all members of the HER expert panel agree that what we really need is a free, child-friendly, commercial-free space that has high-quality, attractive digital content, a sort of online PBS Kids. The internet is here to stay, and children deserve a safe space where they are not the product and their health and well-being are not being sold to the highest bidder. So thank you. And there's more information on the Healthy Eating Research website, and also we posted some to the Children and Screens online website.
Jennifer, thanks. That was a really terrific presentation. In just a short period of time, you got a lot of information across, including some very helpful ideas about what might be done. I have a question for you. So when I was growing up, the only sort of food advertising I saw were commercials on Saturday morning children's television. And I imagine those cost the industry a lot of money, and they were a pretty blunt form of advertising because the same ad was going out to everybody. And now with the targeting they can do with all the algorithms and the fact they can do things like influencers, I'm assuming the number of dollars that they spend have much greater impact now than they used to. So, how far will $1 million go in convincing some child that they should eat Cheetos or a sugared beverage or some sugary cereal? I imagine it's a lot easier to get impact from that $1 million than it used to be. But that's just my impression, and I kind of wondered if that's true. And what made me think about that is I had a conversation recently with somebody who was an influencer, and I learned a little bit more about the process. And what this person told me is that companies send her in her products. She then goes and reviews them, talks about them in a positive way, sends the videos to the companies that then have to approve them. And then if they get posted on YouTube or somewhere like that, then the companies pay. And not a lot, but they pay some. So it seems to me that they can have a fleet of influencers like that with almost no cost. So is that true that the impact per dollar has probably gone way up because of all the digital forms?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's impossible to measure that. But the I have a couple interesting things to note. One is that companies are still advertising on television, and they're still spending a lot of money on television. So that hasn't gone away. But the ways that companies can advertise or market to kids online has just increased exponentially. And a lot of them don't even cost companies anything or very little. Like when a company creates a mobile app and everybody uses it, and they send out coupons and offers, that costs the company very little. Or they maintain their own social media account. So traditional advertising still is big business, and it's still driving the internet. Which is why companies, use the advertising, but and also the viral advertising. A lot of that is and Marie will probably get into this with the influencers. Sometimes influencers are just including brands in their videos because they want to attract the attention of companies who will then pay them. So it's sometimes the companies don't have to do anything at all, and their brands are being promoted online.
Oh, it's so interesting. Well, thanks very much, and thanks for a terrific presentation. I'd like next to turn to Dr. Marie Bragg, our second speaker. Dr. Bragg earned her PhD in clinical psychology from Yale University. I can attest to the quality of her dissertation research as I was on her committee as well. Um, she's now an assistant professor in the Department of Population Health at the NYU School of Medicine. Her research examines how adolescent health issues are affected by social media use and food marketing, including how exposure to unhealthy food and beverage advertisements affects food choices among Black and Latinx youth. Dr. Bragg has served as an expert witness in a litigation case against tech companies. She serves as the senior behavioral expert at the U.S. Federal Trade Commission and has been an expert reviewer for the World Health Organization and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Marie, welcome, and I'm delighted you could join us, and we look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Children in Screens, for having me and hosting this webinar. It's an honor to be alongside my colleagues here in discussing this food marketing topic. So, as Jennifer and Kelly mentioned, I am going to discuss social media influencers and targeted marketing in what I'll share. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose, but as Kelly mentioned, I am currently a senior behavioral expert at the Federal Trade Commission. I will not be discussing any of that work. This presentation will focus on my own research and the research from our lab. In a first show of appreciation to them for all of the work that they've contributed to our influencer studies and related work. So Kelly mentioned when he was starting his introductions that it's for different reasons, it's hard, it's been difficult, and we've been largely unsuccessful in addressing the impact of food marketing to kids in the United States. And I want to zoom out for a second and say that other countries are trying to get a handle on junk food marketing to kids. But one of the gaps in it is that they don't often address digital ads for a few reasons. And part of that is because they can sort of cross country lines. There are other factors that go into it. But the two gaps I want to talk about today, in addition to the social media piece, are the targeted marketing towards Black and Latinx youth, and then thinking about this digital scope of food marketing, particularly influencer marketing. And the reason I want to talk about that is because when we think about why, I'm going to zoom in on adolescents for a second and think about why they might be uniquely susceptible to social media content and influencer content. We know that likes are powerful social norm signals. We did a really simple study where we had one group of adolescents look at an ad of somebody drinking a soda, and we put 100 likes on the ad. We just used Photoshop. We had a different group of adolescents look at the same ad, but we put 10,000 likes on it. And what we found, unsurprisingly, is that adolescents thought that the high likes ad was way cooler, trendier. They were more willing to share it with friends. And so even just that social signal of what's cool really dramatically changed how adolescents felt about that particular ad. We also know that, as Kelly mentioned, ads today look different than when we were growing up and only had access to TV. So this interactive nature where you can comment on a brand's post or reshare and send to friends, or it's capitalizing on a trend, that interactive nature is really unique. And it also sometimes when a brand or an influencer comments back to someone, it can fulfill this adolescent developmental stage for sort of connection, identity formation. So they're in a stage where they care a lot about what they're associating with, what they determine as cool, and the interactive nature of social media maps onto that. One of my favorite studies was a brain imaging study where they brought adolescents into the lab and they said, oh, give us some of your social media posts, and we're going to look at them in the scanner. And they also said, oh, by the way, we let a few of the other participants check out your social media posts, so you might see some different likes, something like that. And what they found was that the reward hub of teenagers' brains got really activated when they saw their own posts with a ton of likes on them. So there was this uniquely good feeling and positive reinforcement in the brain after viewing their own post with many likes. And as we've all seen on social media, ads can appear trendy and similar to friends' posts, and they can blur the line between marketing and entertainment, as our colleagues have written about over the years. And so these factors really uniquely map onto adolescents' sensitivity to peer behavior, and TV ads don't quite mimic these features. So we're really dealing with a totally new version of advertising. And if we think about those factors in the context of influencer marketing, we sort of are able to get a glimpse into a really powerful engine to promote products. As Kelly and Jennifer were saying, there is an opportunity for companies to reach lots of young people who are really dedicated and loyal followers to whatever influencers they like. So some of you may recognize this person. This is Charli D'Amelio. Her income is estimated to be around mid 20 million last year, which is, roughly similar to what McDonald's CEO makes. So this is an enormous amount of money. Obviously, CEOs can also make money from stocks and things like that. But the point is, influencers make a tremendous amount of money. And part of that comes from advertisements that appear before their content or during their content. Part of it comes from sponsorship deals. But it's a really a new world compared to decades ago when we didn't see this kind of interactive nature. And one of the things I want to draw attention to in particular here is that influencers form a bond with the people who follow them in ways that are really unique. We as researchers call this a parasocial relationship. It's a sort of one-sided friendship where if I'm following an influencer, I might feel like I know them. I might feel like we're friends. I might feel like I have some sort of special connection with them because they share details about their life. Maybe I get a glimpse into how they start their day in the Get Ready With Me videos. And so that all feeds into this sense of loyalty and willingness to sort of trust the influence and opinion of the influencer. So I want to sort of do a deep dive into the landscape of influencer marketing, because one of the common things that I hear, and I know my colleagues on this call do, is, well, what about healthy marketing, and could that be an effective tool? And so we did this study to understand, okay, let's see what's going on in influencer marketing, particularly for the young influencers. So we wanted to just get a sense of how healthy and unhealthy were the products shown in young influencers' videos. And to Kelly and Jennifer's points about brand appearances, sometimes they're paid for, sometimes they might not be. We wanted to understand how frequently branded items versus unbranded showed up. And we thought that we would see more branded products than unbranded. The reason we were interested in this is because a few years ago, the highest paid YouTube star was a 9-year-old who was making $30 million a year. And so the reach of this is really tremendous. So we identified a sample of videos by looking at the top 5 most popular YouTube channels among young kids. We excluded channels that were in languages other than English, and we visited each channel. And first, we identified the 50 videos with the most views for part of our sample. And then we identified 50 videos with food or beverage in the thumbnail. This was important because they can choose the thumbnail that they put on the video to entice us. So if something is showing food and or a brand, it shows what they want us to be attracted to. There were only 168 of those because not everybody had a ton of food and beverage in the thumbnails. So that gave us a final sample of 418 YouTube videos by these 5 influencer channels. What we wanted to do was pretty simple. We wanted to say, is there food or beverage present in the video? Were people in the video playing with it? Were they consuming it? Were they cooking with it? And how many minutes did it appear? We used the nutrient profile model, which the Red Center has really sort of ingrained in their food marketing work, and is something that our lab has followed suit on because it's a really useful validated tool. We did content analysis where people scored the material, but the main take home is we saw very few healthy branded items, like you see here, very few healthy unbranded items. So a healthy unbranded item would be like an orange or a piece of broccoli. And notice how similar this is to what Jennifer was saying about the very limited nature of healthy food marketing. What we did see a ton of was branded unhealthy food. So you can see in this screenshot, the title of this YouTube video is Baby Reacts to Pop Rocks Candy. The mom was pouring the candy into the baby's mouth, and they filmed how he responded. And then there were a sizable number of unhealthy, unbranded items, but you can really see the breakdown is nowhere near close on the healthy side. This had tremendous reach. So these handful of videos had 18 million likes and a tremendous number of views, 1 billion. So it's the access to this information is growing and sort of outguns any public health nutrition campaign we have. It's not just influencer marketing to young people through what you just saw. One of the other aspects that we see on social media and broadly speaking with digital media is targeted marketing towards groups of color. And part of my interest in this came from this interview with the one of the executives from Coca-Cola and Ad Age, which is a magazine that talks about advertising issues. And so what you can see in this interview between the two of them, Ad Age is asking about campaigns that the Coca-Cola has done, and the executive from Coca-Cola talks about targeting Black youth and how they perceive Black youth to be trendsetters. They ask what sorts of results are you seeing, and Coca-Cola talks about building loyalty and building share. And so this is really part of what got us interested in this topic of targeted marketing to youth. And as you can see here, TikTok, you can see down at the bottom here the enormous reach of these sorts of videos. And you can see celebrity endorsements, music celebrities, athletes. Sometimes they'll partner with smaller influencers. But as I close out here, the main takeaway, in addition to what Jennifer said, was think about sharing with kids if you're a caregiver about how people are paid to do these things, and think about ways to sort of talk through with them with curiosity what they're seeing, but critically talking about things and kids' awareness and education on these things is not enough. So part of what Jennifer discussed with the policy interventions is particularly important because we're still influenced by advertising, even when we know what it's trying to do. So with that, I'll stop, and thank you so much.
Marie, thanks. That was terrific. And boy, what an interesting bit of insight into that world of influencers and just the scope of the number of people who are seeing these things, and the fact that, some 9-year-old boy, would make so many millions of dollars a year is really pretty stunning. Let me ask a follow-up question. So are ads targeted at parents as well as children? And because you talked a lot about what children were exposed to, but do parents get targeted, and what sort of tactics should parents be on the lookout for?
Parents, if they're on social media, have probably come across mom influencers, and this covers everything from sort of what to pack in kids' lunches to how to stock your fridge, a whole gamut of topics. One of the things that stood out to me as a parent was when I was looking for lunchbox ideas and online, and I saw this information that was featuring this packaged gummies, and I thought, oh, this is like in every picture. What is this? And then down at the bottom it said this, they were sponsored by this pack of gummies. And so and I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't just like something this person necessarily chose. It's they were paid to put this in here. So the advertising is infused in recommendations that moms or parents are giving to other parents. So being aware and keeping an eye out for those disclosures like #ad or brand partner or things like that is really important. And in some cases, the parent might be using those products. In other cases, they might not. So that's a really important issue to pay attention to.
It seems to me one purpose of some of this marketing is to give parents permission to yield to the children's demands for some of these foods. So, the kids are seeing ads, they're going to ask their parents to buy this sugared cereal or that beverage or something. And it seems like some of these ads try to persuade parents that those things are okay, that they're healthier than they really are, or they're somehow good for children. Does that seem true to you?
Yes, and Kelly, that ties back to that idea that likes and views are a social norm signal. So if there's something popular being featured and a parent sees, well, this has been viewed a million times and there are lots of people commenting how much they like it, it seems okay
Mm.
if other people are doing it. So it's supercharging that.
That's so interesting. Thanks, Marie. That was, as I said, very illuminating. So I'm happy that we can move on to our third speaker, Dr. Diane Gilbert-Diamond. She's professor of epidemiology, medicine, and pediatrics at the School of Medicine at Dartmouth University in Hanover, New Hampshire. She received her doctorate degree in nutritional epidemiology from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. Dr. Gilbert-Diamond joined Dartmouth's faculty in 2012, where she runs an NIH-funded research lab that studies children's responsivity to food cues and its effect on obesogenic eating behaviors. Her lab uses a multimodal approach to study childhood obesity, including epidemiologic, behavioral, functional neuroimaging, and eye tracking methodologies. Diane, thanks so much for being with us. I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk, and thank you so much to the Children in Screens program for all the wonderful work and advocacy they do. So thank you. So today I'd like to share on the idea of food cue reactivity to advertisements in children. So as Dr. Bragg and Dr. Harris presented, food marketing is extremely abundant, and I'd like to give you another thing to think about for how this marketing can influence our eating behaviors. So to start, I just wanted to point out that we have complex homeostatic mechanisms that regulate our energy balance. So hormones like insulin, leptin, ghrelin give us very strong signals related to hunger and satiety. And even though we can overeat or not eat enough, in general, we're pretty good at regulating our energy intake to regulate, to balance out the energy that we expend every day. But of course, in the US and around the world, we have many, many people who have overweight and obesity. So this homeostatic mechanism is not perfect. Our biology is not set up to deal with our current environment where we have so much highly palatable food available to us, as well as a lot of cues to eat that are bombarding us every single day. So in addition to those homeostatic mechanisms that I spoke about, we also have very strong reward mechanisms that drive eating. So if you eat something like a chocolate chip cookie, your brain will release dopamine and you'll feel a lot of pleasure or reward from eating that food. And highly processed, ultra-processed foods have been carefully engineered to really activate our reward systems in our brain. So when we eat something like a carrot or an apple, we will get some pleasure response, but that's nothing like eating a bag of Doritos or candy or these ultra processed foods that have really been studied and engineered to target this system. So through classic conditioning, we can pair our reward response to something like food to an external cue. So this is an illustration of Pavlov's famous experiment where he fed a dog while ringing a bell. And he repeatedly cued the bell input with the feeding for this dog. And then eventually, even when the food's not present and Pavlov rang that bell, the dog would have this response. He would produce saliva and start eliciting food-seeking behaviors. So the same exact thing happens to us with food marketing. So a lot of these processed foods and fast foods are highly branded, and we consume these foods in the presence of these branded markers. And we elicit our reward response eating this highly palatable food. And eventually, when you see these advertisements for the foods, we will have a reward response in our brains that will lead to cravings and seeking for those foods. So as Dr. Harris mentioned, children see many, many food advertisements a year, and they're primarily for unhealthy, nutrient poor, calorie dense foods. And this is not at all this is an underestimate. This is just for TV food advertisements. But if you want to consider all the marketing, of course, we have to think about the other electronic forms of marketing and the influencer marketing that the panelists have already mentioned. So what I'd like to show you is research by our group and others that show that food ads activate brain reward regions. So we brought pre-adolescents, 9 to 11 years old, into our lab, and we used an MRI. And what we do is we show them a television show, and we show them control ads and food ads while they're in the scanner, and we look at their brain response in these reward regions to the food advertisement. And what we found is the nucleus accumbens, orbital frontal cortex, some reward regions of their brain are activated in response to food ads over and above the activation that they would have to toy ads, electronic ads, things like that. So really, these advertisements are eliciting this brain response of reward. And I just want to pull it outside of the lab. So other research has looked at food ad exposure in the real life outside of the lab. So they gave participants a smartphone that they used throughout the week, and they repeatedly asked them, to report whenever they encountered food marketing through the day, up to 6 times a day. And then they asked them to describe their cravings and hunger after they saw that food marketing. And what they found, and this is in adults, but it's very likely that this would extend to children as well. What they found is that adults report that their cravings for food increase after seeing food ads. Their cravings for food increase after seeing digital ads, and their cravings for food increase after seeing outdoor ads, such as billboards or signs on the street. So it's not just that the food ads increase this reward response and cravings, but the food ads increase how much food children consume. So in these same children, we brought them into our lab and we had them watch a television show embedded with food ads, or an alternative television show embedded with toy ads. And on average, children ate about 50 more calories of snack food after watching the show, or during watching a show with food ads embedded. And this is, importantly, this is after they had already eaten a meal to satiety. So they ate a lunch, said they were full, and then they were presented with these food ads, which spurred them to eat more. And there's also a robust body of research that suggests that food ads not only cause children to eat more food, but they influence the type of foods that children eat. So as the panelists have already said, there isn't marketing for healthy foods. The marketing for healthy foods, like public service type marketing for healthy foods, isn't as effective. And children will choose these ultra-processed foods when presented with food ads and given a choice with a buffet of different options. So One thing that our lab was particularly interested in asking is whether some children are genetically predisposed to react to food ads. So we know that genetic factors can increase our risk of excess weight gain. And we also know that genetic factors can relate to excess weight gain through appetitive traits, like how much children ask for food, are interested in food, and how quickly they say they're full or if they slow down over the course of a meal. So we know that there are genetic factors related to how children interact with food. So what we did is in the same experiment where we brought children in and into a scanner, we genotyped them. So we tested their genetics for a marker that's related to obesity called the FTO gene. So we looked at a marker in FTO, and what we found was that for children who have the lowest genetic risk for obesity, their reward response to the food ads was not different than their reward response to the toy ads. But for the children who had genetic risk for obesity, they had much more of a reward response to food versus toy ads. So there was a difference in how much the reward response was activated by their genetics. In addition, when we look at how much the kids ate after their lunch when provided with snacks in relation when they were exposed to food ads versus toy ads, we found that these are the kids, the TT on the left are the kids that have the lowest genetic risk for obesity. And the food advertising didn't influence their eating very much at all. But when you took kids that were at the higher genetic risk for obesity, they were very influenced and ate a lot more when presented with food ads versus toy ads. In fact, those at highest genetic risk for obesity ate 125 more calories over the course of just 20 minutes when presented with food ads versus toy ads. So when we think about food ad exposure and how it influences eating, it's important to realize that there's some kids who are very, very at risk for having negative effects from food ad exposure. So, strategies to reduce unhealthy food cue exposure. Of course, as Dr. Harris mentioned, we want to limit exposure to food advertisements. And we can try to do that through limiting screen time, choosing screen-free content, blocking ads when possible. And it's important to consider all forms of food marketing. The influencer marketing that Dr. Bragg mentioned is increasingly important. And when possible, I know it's as a mother of 3 children, I know this is not always possible, but if we co-view with our children, then we can have more awareness of the ads that they are exposed to. I also just want to bring this out of not just this idea of cue reactivity is not only important in relation to advertisements, but as we set up our home food environment, we can also consider increasing the visibility of nutrient-rich, low-processed foods and limit the visibility of nutrient-poor, ultra-processed foods. So just the old idea of putting the candy bowl away, perhaps putting the fresh fruit out. And then I'd like everybody to really consider that the impact of food cues on eating can be greater for some individuals compared to others. So what works for one individual may not work as much for another. And of course, as we've all said, we need to advocate for child-friendly policies around food marketing. So having policies that don't leave this up to individual parents, individual families to limit this food advertising, but create a positive, healthy culture. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate this opportunity again.
Diane, thanks so much. Boy, it's really interesting to hear about the the work being done with brain imaging and other very sophisticated techniques to see what the response to children is by having all this exposure to the food ads. One assumes the food industry is doing this neuroscience kind of research to develop their ads in the first place. Is that true? And people are using pretty strong terms to describe what's happening to the brains of children, like children's brains are being hijacked by the chemical properties of the foods, but also by the marketing. Do you think the industry is doing this kind of research, and are words like hijack too strong in this context?
That's a great question. I'm not, I don't know firsthand whether the industry is doing brain imaging studies for food marketing. Um, what I would say though is that a lot of the focus groups that we know that they do can reveal whether some of the ads elicit, this reward response. Because what follows after the reward response is food seeking. So, when you're watching a television show and the ad comes on, and then you a couple minutes later have the urge to go to the kitchen for, a snack, that's not a coincidence, right? It's triggered whether we're aware of it or not. And I think the food industry is very aware of their success in eliciting reward response, both from the composition of the foods that they're putting out there, but also through their marketing.
Thanks. Very, very helpful. So I'd like to welcome Marie and Jennifer to rejoin us and to open up the floor to questions from the audience. And I've been getting some of these in the chat room, and we'll start off with a few. But first, I wanted to thank all our speakers. Those were terrific presentations. So let me start off with a question, and really anybody can answer this. But there are a lot of terms thrown around to describe the types of foods that are being marketed. Processed was used, ultra-processed, healthy, unhealthy. How do parents think through these terms? I mean, what's meant by ultra-processed foods, for example, and how do you think of healthy versus unhealthy foods? And as I said, open to anybody to answer.
Yeah, I think it can be confusing for sure. I think that one easy way to think about ultra processed foods, they typically have ingredients that you wouldn't have independently in your kitchen. So an emulsifier or a gel or something that it would not typically exist on its own in your kitchen. So that's an easy kind of rule to think about. Ultra processed foods often have very long shelf lives that make them very convenient. Um, so that's another thing that, if it's in the pantry, it's a lot of the foods that we have that are highly packaged in the pantries, it could be more ultra processed. And really the ultra processing to increase the palatability of the foods, they're often have a lot of added sugars. So that's something that you can look for in the labels, added sugars, added salt, and added fat. And often the fiber is taken out. And all of those things together make it easier for the sugar to enter your bloodstream and kind of even more cravings and reward response.
Okay, thanks. It's timely that question comes up because just yesterday and today, there's a lot of publicity about a committee established by the well-respected medical journal Lancet on ultra-processed foods, and a report has come out. And the basic concept, as I understand it, about ultra-processed foods is that foods can deliver beneficial or harmful nutrients, and foods can be bad because they're high in, say, sugar, fat, and salt. But the concept of ultra-processing is that the techniques used to produce those foods, to industrially engineer those foods, can have an independent set of effects on health and well-being beyond the fact that they're delivering those nutrients. And there's some controversy about whether that's true, but I think at the very least, it's safe to say that all that industrial processing is designed to make people overeat the foods that are high in sugar, fat, and salt. And that in turn is having negative consequences. So I'm happy we were able to address that. Let me ask another question. This didn't really come up in anybody's discussion, but I know you've probably all thought about it. And it's how can parents protect their children from harmful dieting advice and things about disordered eating? Because that comes up in this kind of context as well.
One thing I like to chime in about dieting advice is helping kids, depending on their age, understand the tools that modify how people look online and how what's presented online isn't reality in many cases. And so being able to talk to them about that sets in some foundation. But as we've been saying throughout this, so what I'm talking about is sort of filters that make people's body shape look different and how we don't know exactly what they're doing when the video is turned off. But as we've been saying all throughout this webinar, simply educating young people on those things is not enough to not be influenced by them. So curious conversations with kids and teenagers is important to understand what they're seeing, what they think about it, and being able to link them up with appropriate resources if needed. But we know that the some of the diet culture of influencers, I've seen it raise questions, among young people saying like, should I be eating one meal a day? And so if you have that open dialogue with your child or teen, it allows you to be a resource for them amid the sea of misinformation and dangerous advice that's given.
Okay, that makes good sense. Let's see, there are a number of questions from the listeners that have to do with particular parenting practices. So one question said, what can I do about ads that come up while my kids are playing a game on an iPad? And that's just one example of the kind of exposure that a child might have. But in any suggestions for what parents might do to A, be aware of it or be able to monitor, and then second, what to do about it?
Well, I would say that one thing parents should be aware of is that this is an old adage in digital marketing. If the product is free, then you're the product. Or if the application is free. So all these games that are available for free to kids online have a lot of embedded marketing content in them. Um, Minecraft and I can't think of the other really popular ones, but there's marketing in there. So I think just knowing that and trying to limit your children's use of those free games is good advice.
Okay, sounds good. Somebody asked a question that I thought was pretty interesting, having to do with algorithms. So the question is, how do addictive feeds or social media algorithms exacerbate the problem of children's exposure to digital marketing? So how do these algorithms get used exactly, and how carefully can they target an individual child?
I could talk a little bit about that, but that's sort of the black box out there that nobody really understands how these algorithms work, and the advertisers say that they don't understand all the details either. But for example, take something like energy drinks. If your child goes on gaming sites, live stream gaming sites is a or looks at video game sites, then they will be flagged as a potential energy drink user. That's a market that energy drinks are actively targeting. So it creates sort of a negative loop because if you are exposed, if you go to these types of sites, then you're going to be exposed to more of this unhealthy marketing, and then you'll be identified as someone who views unhealthy marketing, and it can snowball. So, but calling for more oversight and um, more visibility of what these algorithms are doing and how they're targeting not only kids, but adults too. That's would be a huge privacy call to action.
Okay, makes sense. Here's a question that reminded me of something in particular. And here's the question. Aside from product promotion, are there other types of content children see on social media that could be harmful to their diet/nutrition? And as I was reading that question, I thought of how the norms of eating have changed over the years and how the food industry has driven this to a large extent. So, for example, when I was growing up, nobody ate food in their car. And now everybody eats food in their car, and that's a norm that's been systematically changed. You can think also of the campaign that the industry has waged to convince people it's okay to have a meal between dinner and breakfast. And Taco Bell, I think, called this the fourth meal. So it gives permission for people to eat, not young children, but teenagers especially, to eat late at night, and that fast food is what you should be eating during that time. Do you see other examples of norm change that come across in this context, as well as marketing for specific products?
Yeah, I'll follow up on what you said, Kelly, that the norms have changed drastically. And one of the biggest differences is the multitasking when people are eating. So you had mentioned eating in the car, but many people are eating in front of a device. So they're being marketed to from the device, but also just having the split attention where people are eating when they're not aware of their eating causes people to eat more. So when, in, laboratory studies, they've done many studies of distracted eating, and people just, the homeostatic mechanisms that I had mentioned just work less well when we're eating and not paying attention to the fact that we're eating. So it's, at our college, like many colleges, if you go into the dining hall, so if anybody is alone, they're always on their phone eating. And in the libraries, people are eating while working. So that is something that we can consider as parents, that when our kids are eating, have them eat and pay attention to that in isolation. Yeah.
And I'll
You know, give
just
us,
chime in that the rapid nature of viral trends means that norms can shift in what becomes popular in very rapid fashion. And so things that might seem gross, somebody on my team, Zora Hall, was just sharing that a popular trend is to take a fast food restaurant and, deep fry it or cover it in orange, stuff and eat it, and people film it. And so things we would never do before are now new norms because of that popularity.
And I'll just add my 2 cents. So, Kelly, when you and I were kids, I don't think it was the norm that parents need to serve their kids fun, colorful, immediately satisfying foods. And the marketing to kids especially has, I think, really created that expectation and hurt kids' eating habits.
Yeah, and just one other quick thing that made me think of is just the variety also can override some of our regulatory mechanisms. So just the sheer abundance of the types of cereals, the type of chips, the types of ice cream can keep us interested in eating more. So if the freezer only has vanilla ice cream, and that's the only ice cream day after day, people tend not to overeat it as much as if every day there's a different flavor. So that's also a different norm. And the marketing takes advantage of that. That's why there are always new flavors and versions and, packaging in different ways to keep us interested.
a question that got submitted I thought was pretty interesting, and it seems to have an obvious answer, but I think it's worth addressing anyway. And it's, do children who overuse social media or video games have poor nutritional outcomes? And if so, why is that? And I was reminded, Diane, when you were speaking, you talked about one of your studies and how many calories a child might overeat in response to some stimulus from out there in the ether. And Jennifer, I remember you did research on this many years ago, looking at exposure to food ads and what it did to eating in an acute sense, what it did to immediate eating. So tell us about the magnitude of that impact. So okay, the children watch a commercial for some food and they want more of that food, but how much more? And do they eat a lot more of it or just a little bit? And is the amount, the increment that they might eat in response to that kind of advertising a public health concern? So help put that in context, if you will. And really, here, I'd like to hear from anybody.
Well, I would just say that the studies, I think Diane's study as well, showed that it wasn't an advertised food that kids ate more of. It was whatever food was available to them at the time. So it just stimulated consumption. And that is really the million-dollar question. But the problem is, how do you find a control group for that study? Because if kids are not watching as much screen timers or using social media, there's probably something else about them that isn't the average child. And doing research at Yale during our days there, Yale students do not watch as much television as students at public university that I went to. So, it's really hard to make generalizations or to make causal connections between those two. But
So
if it,
given what you just said, that the food advertising stimulates a desire to eat, so people will eat whatever is around, wouldn't the smart parent then just have good food around and presumably a advertisement for Cheeto could stimulate the desire to eat, but if you have broccoli and baby carrots around, the children will overeat that. Tell me about that.
Well,
so
I don't think they'll overeat the carrots and broccoli. But go ahead, Jenny.
I'm suspecting not.
Well, actually, so we did a study with college students where we did provide healthy foods as well as unhealthy foods. And what we found was that people ate more after seeing food ads. They ate more of what they liked. So there was a group of students who, loved carrots, so they ate more carrots. So, but it wasn't specific to the marketing that they saw.
Okay, that makes
And
sense.
the healthy food ads did not increase consumption in the same way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the
I think that
fundamental, no,
sorry. I
you go, Diane.
just want to, I mean, I think you're right that the food that we have accessible at home is important. But
Mhm.
I think that the marketing creates a situation where parents and children can be in constant conflict about, getting this cereal or getting that or stopping at the stores. So it can just make the marketing can make it more difficult for parents um, because the children will nag the parents for certain items. So yeah, I just think it's like it's not just a parent's responsibility. As a society, we should figure out how to solve this.
One question that somebody submitted is interesting and makes me want to ask a question about the future. If each of you can, look into your crystal ball. And the question is this, are certain types of food ads trendy among children on social media? And I think you help address that already. But the question is, what's the next generation of this going to look like? I mean, you talked a lot about influencers and about algorithms and highly targeted messages. How sophisticated can it get? And well, what do you expect it, and this is changing. I mean, you could ask what it's going to look like tomorrow, and it would be different than it is today. But if you think ahead a year, two, five, where do you think this is going to go?
Something I have been hearing a lot of people discuss is having meal plans. This is parents specifically having meal plans sort of generated by ChatGPT. And I've been curious about marketing through AI. And but the other thing is the ability to know someone's preferences deeply based on the constellation of people they follow and interact with. creates a kind of hyper targeting opportunity that could just continue to get more sophisticated with advanced analytics.
Okay.
And I guess on a more, I don't even want, I can't even guess what companies are going to come up with, to be honest. But I think one thing that gives me a little bit of hope is that, in the whole scheme of things, the food marketing that kids are seeing online is not the worst. I mean, they're seeing gambling ads, they're seeing alcohol ads, they're seeing tobacco as diet products, steroids, guns. And I just have to believe that it's going to get to a point where enough people are going to say this has to
Mm.
stop. This has to be regulated.
Okay. So from that point of view, some general effort to protect children might include a lot of things, including food. And therefore, so like, for example, there are lawsuits by the state attorneys general against some of the social media companies, and maybe the food picture would improve to the extent those lawsuits are successful. Um, Here's sort of $1 million question, if you will. So what's the panel's take on specific food parenting practices or styles that can help counteract the effects of food marketing? So what are some of the other things that parents can do to not only counteract the effects, but just create a good food environment in general?
Yeah, I think that we had mentioned the idea of eating, like having eating be its own activity, not done on the run or in front of the TV, but eating. And to add to that, there is research that supports that eating with your child. So, family meals are really beneficial. And partly because children, especially young children, the parents are models for their children. So, when parents are eating a variety of foods and healthy foods, that actually does impact what the child will eat. And maybe they won't eat a new food right away, but if they see it again and again, they're more likely to eat it after repeated exposure. So those are just a couple things that could be helpful.
Okay. And Marie and Jennifer, or do you have additional advice you'd like to offer parents?
Well, I guess I can talk about my experience because I started studying this issue when my youngest was in elementary school. And I'm one of those parents that bought sugared cereals and, Lunchables and those kinds of things. And my, I just assumed they were okay because they were for kids. And I also learned how difficult it is to stop having those things around once that's what your kids are used to eating. So I guess my advice for new parents is to just keep those foods out of your house if at all possible.
Okay.
And my comment, so I'm a parent of four, and part of what I think about is the battles that come up when things are around and the sort of ease when they're not. And so I sort of have two mindsets. One is I our house is going to have, nutritious foods. It's also going to have some things that we like to enjoy as a family, and that's okay. And then I can't really control what's at other kids' birthday parties and things like that. So there may be times where that sort of flexible mindset of being mindful of things I can't control is important. But the really critical piece, Kelly, I think that's important too, is if you're a parent and this is hard and you feel overwhelmed and you feel like this is an uphill battle, you're not alone and you are dealing with a multi-billion-dollar engine that is programmed to get your kids to request these things and to make it challenging. So be kind to yourself too, and just be aware of how big the engine is that you're working against.
Okay, thanks. That's very helpful advice. I'd like to ask each of you a final question, and sort of a big picture question. Do you have any hope that anything legislative or regulatory might have an impact? What do you think about litigation as a possibility? And sort of overall, are you optimistic about the future? So it's kind of a lot built into that single question. But if you could just kind of conclude by saying, how are you feeling about the way things are going? And if you could wave a wand and certain things could happen, what would they be? Diane, let's start with you.
I would say one thing that gives me optimism are seminars like this, where we kind of are bringing up the science and helping people to understand just the landscape of what's happening and the influence that things have, and really backed by scientific research. Um, to add to that, I think that Marie's point about not feeling stigmatized around food choices is really important. And I just want to add to that, I think we have a growing awareness also about obesity stigma. And that really is there's a lot of stigma against individuals for their weight or food choices that people make. And I think that having this broader understanding about the food industry and all of the efforts that they're making to market this food, and also a broader understanding that it's not just a individual self-regulation issue, that these foods are kind of designed to push us to eat. To me, that gives me hope that we have this broader understanding and people are feeling less at individual fault. And we understand that it's more of a societal problem. And I think as a society, we can be we've done hard things before, and I think that we can solve this.
Okay, Marie, what about you?
I'm inspired by the recent Children in Screens Congress, the conference that I went to, where I saw all the cutting edge research that was happening and the way people were coming together and how policymakers, parents, and researchers are really excited and energized by these issues. And I reflect back on tobacco companies and how, it seemed like an uphill battle, but public opinion shifts and policies can shift. And so things that feel impossible can become possible. And I think what we're seeing in the news with school districts doing things with digital media and everything like that gives me a lot of hope. And so people staying involved in ways like this is what captures the attention of the people who can make decisions to change things.
Sounds good. Thanks. And Jennifer?
Yeah, I think there is action, as Marie said, going on outside of the US, where other countries are starting to tackle food marketing to kids and digital marketing more broadly. So that gives me hope, and the researchers working on that to evaluate how they affect what kids are eating is, I think, really important. Yeah, I think I don't know who has the political will to do this, but if we can somehow um, put companies to task for what they're costing society as a whole in healthcare and shorter lives and more comorbidities, you know that would be extremely, extremely positive.
Good. Well, thank you all. This has been a remarkable webinar. We still have just a few quick things to do, but I wanted to thank each of you. When I introduced you as the All-Star team, it turned out to be that was absolutely correct. I really loved all the responses to questions and the presentations themselves for the bringing together, the looking at the intersection of what's known from science and what can practically be done out there by parents in the real world. So it was extremely helpful. So thank you, Jennifer and Marie and Diane, for taking part. I'm really grateful for that. And in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Kris Perry to conclude. And she might be mentioning this herself, but I wanted to draw people's attention to a particularly helpful resource, which is a book called The Handbook of Children and Screens. And this is a book that got published that has many excellent chapters in it. And thankfully, it's an open access book, so you can download the book and not have to pay for it. So it's available online. Again, it's called The Handbook of Children and Screens. There's a lot of helpful information on that. So I'd like to turn the floor back over to Kris Perry, Executive Director of the Children and Screens organization. And I wish we'd had more time because there were some fantastic questions that we didn't actually get to. So I wanted to thank everybody who participated in this for having so many wonderful things to say. Kris, the floor is yours.
Thank you to our panelists and especially Dr. Kelly Brownell for sharing research and practical guidance on how digital food marketing shapes children's cravings, routines, and health. We heard clear takeaways. Influencer content and online ads can distort kids' food cues. Problematic media use can compound those effects. And families, schools, and policymakers all have roles to play to advance science-based safeguards. If you found today's webinar insightful, help us keep the conversation going by making a donation today. Just scan the QR code on the screen or visit childrenandscreens.org to give. Thank you.